2 months ago, Elon Musk bought Twitter with the intention of saving free speech. He had to sell $22.9 billion of Tesla stock to finance it, and in the process became one of the most in-debt CEOs on the planet. But he did it because he had full conviction that Twitter and the world needs him.
Why make that offer? Well, I think it's very important for there to be an inclusive arena for free speech.
Since he's taken over the company, hate speech is up 300%, and free speech is looking a lot more like giving randos on the internet an $8 a month check mark so they can pose as fake accounts and scam the naive with cryptocurrencies and fake public announcements. So my question is, where did it all go wrong? Like, were Elon's intentions actually positive in the beginning and now it's just unraveling? Or was this kind of the plan all along? And can Twitter be saved? I spent hours this week watching footage of Elon to see if he actually authentically believes in free speech and the mission with Twitter, and I also read countless articles of people heavily criticizing him to get the balanced take, and I even sat down with legal expert Devin Stone from Legal Eagle, and the story that's unfolding is genuinely fascinating, and I think it's one of the biggest stories in tech for 2023 that we should all be well versed on right now. So here it is. All my research in one video, the story of Twitter told in 3 parts. Okay, so part 1, what Twitter was like pre-Elon Musk. I think it's really easy as a person that uses Twitter all the time to get the skewed perception that everyone is using Twitter all the time, but in reality, Twitter's user base is actually significantly smaller than Instagram or Facebook or YouTube, but the user base that it does have is super influential because it's a lot of public figures and journalists and people that are at the top of their field, so Twitter can be a great networking tool, but it's also often the place where news breaks because it's also very text-based. So even though Twitter didn't have like a massive user base of average users, it had a huge influence on culture. But not having a lot of average users use the application meant that monetizing it was really hard. But when Elon saw this company, I think that he saw there was an opportunity here. And so he decided to buy 10% of the company because he believed in it. And this gave him a minority stake in the company. And then I think he realized that he wasn't going to be able to make enough difference in the company by only owning 10%. And so he made an offer to buy the entire thing. And immediately, 7 new problems arise. There's misaligned company culture. A lot of people are unhappy with the way that Elon took over the company, and so a lot of employees don't really want to work for Elon. There's a bot problem where there are so many users that are not actually active, and not only are they spreading in misinformation, but all those extra accounts are bogging down the server. And then there's this revenue problem that happened before Elon took over, but it's only getting worse now that Elon has taken over because Elon Musk is posting a lot of stuff on a daily basis that a lot of advertisers don't agree with. And because he's also doing a lot of things in real time, like launching new services and firing people and responding back to people, a lot of advertisers are like unsure what the future of Twitter is going to look like. So they've pulled their advertising dollars. Like 50% of advertisers are no longer spending on Twitter, which is only making the revenue problem worse. He also launched an $8 a month verification system, which basically let anyone get a blue check mark as long as they were paying $8 a month. And he did this to try to increase the revenue model so they're less advertiser reliant. If they get the user base to actually pay on a recurring model, it kind of helps stabilize revenue. In theory, it makes sense, but I feel like the verification checkmark was the wrong thing to offer because it has led to a lot of impersonations, people impersonating not only Elon Musk, but then companies and affecting their stock potentially. And also with the increase in hate speech, now the fact that there are certain accounts that are verified and posting hate speech, very bad combination. But Elon has publicly acknowledged a lot of this, saying like, we're going to make a lot of mistakes, but we're going to learn in real time because we care so much about free speech. But do they actually care about free speech? And what actually is free speech? Because free speech, that term, is put all over the internet all the time. People saying that certain platforms are censoring people and that free speech is only available on X platform. And then Elon saying that the whole reason that he spent all this money and is a CEO is because of free speech. And so I actually needed to find out what is free speech and what's protected on a platform, because I feel like that's going to inform the whole rest of the story.
This is a pet peeve of mine. I guess in the common vernacular, free speech means different things. In the legal context, free speech means the prohibition from the government from censoring people's speech. And when you're talking about private companies like Twitter or YouTube or the New York Times or whatever, those are effectively private citizens too. And not only do they have a right of free speech, but they also have a right of free association. And if they want to kick people off of their platform, they can do so. That is exercising their free speech. And so some people call that censorship, but that is just users saying things that maybe platforms don't want people to say. They can have whatever reason they want for kicking people off the platform. And so when Elon Musk is saying he bought Twitter for the purposes of free speech, not in the legal sense, at least. It has nothing to do with free speech in the legal sense. It is just simply that he disagreed with the editorial decisions that the prior administration of Twitter was making, and he wanted to allow different kinds of speech, allow different kinds of creators to be on the platform. And now that he owns the Twitter platform, he's welcome to make those decisions, but it's not any more or less free speech than what everybody else was doing beforehand.
Ooh, that's such an interesting take. Yeah, because I think it's very easy to kind of like get tied to what he's saying in all these like hours of footage where he's talking about that Twitter is kind of like the digital courtyard now for everyone to convene. And I think in a lot of ways it is. Like Twitter definitely is where information spreads, but that's so interesting that it doesn't become any more or less free with him owning it. It's just that it's different in what content's allowed. Do you think that there's like, they still have moderation obviously, but when he took over initially, the amount of hate speech increased like exponentially like overnight. Do you think that there's any like role that the government does play in kind of moderating it? Or since it's a private company that's in multiple countries, is there like no moderation of the government with free speech?
I mean, generally speaking, the moderation decisions that they choose to make and whether they allow more or less hate speech or how they define hate speech doesn't really implicate, again, the US government in any way. There's no prohibition against hate speech. The First Amendment doesn't have an exception for hate speech. Lots of people get this wrong.
Okay.
That they think that, oh, the First Amendment doesn't apply to certain kinds of speech and hate speech is one of those kinds of speech, and therefore you can moderate hate speech. I mean, that's such a insane chain of logic from a lawyer's perspective, because the First Amendment does not have an exception for hate speech. So generally speaking, hate speech is protected, at least as protected as everything else. If a platform wants to say, we don't want to have people who are espousing hate speech, it can decide to do that because it doesn't want to be associated with those people. And if it says, no, we're totally cool with all this hate speech, it's good for advertisers and the bottom line, let's bring on more hate speech. Well, it can do that too, because the government isn't going to step in and say, no, you're not allowed to propound hate speech, because they absolutely are. It does get a little bit more complicated though when you're talking about other governments. The EU has different rules. Yeah. India in particular has some really nasty rules when it comes to platform related moderation. So one of the things that I think Elon did not understand when he purchased Twitter that he has now come to understand is that the rules that you make for one country may not be allowable in another country. And it's a really, really difficult needle to thread when you're trying to make everyone happy. Not only the users in one particular country, but the governments in one particular country. It's a mess. And I do not envy the job of anyone, whether it's Elon's administration or the prior Twitter administration, in trying to make everybody happy, because you can't. And so you're going to have to make some trade-offs.
Like if they appeal to these people that want to be like sensationalized and hate speech and stuff, like they may get this very dedicated user base. Like we see other like social media platforms like pop up to like give these extremists a platform. But I think like the general person doesn't want that. But also like hate speech isn't allowed to a certain extent depending on what type of hate speech it is, right? Like if it's threatening something, where do you think like that line gets drawn like legally with like what is allowed to be posted on Twitter versus not?
In terms of that kind of speech that is punishable while still adhering to the First Amendment, you generally have two different categories. You have what are called true threats, which is generally speaking, I mean, the prime example of that would be like running up to someone, knife in hand, and saying like, I'm going to kill you. Okay. And even if you don't like, bring the knife down, you're still gonna get arrested. Or if you point a gun at someone in real life, and say I'm going to shoot you, you're going to be arrested because that's considered legally a true threat. And then other than that, I think you're probably going to get into things like defamation, where it is an untrue, specific, factual assertion, provably true or false assertion that impugns someone's reputation. And then there's the third category that I'd qualify as incitement related speech, where it's so inflammatory that it is going to incite imminent lawless action. That is an incredibly high standard to meet, and basically never gets met. So in terms of what the law says, those certain categories of things that Twitter has to take down and moderate, it's a very small number of things. It's really just editorial decisions that they want to make in the sense of what do they want their community to look like. Yeah,
I feel like that's really the thing that has changed with Elon coming over, is like the line being drawn, like where it's drawn has changed, but it's so interesting to think that like free speech actually hasn't. And I think that a lot of people have a misconception, I definitely did, of like what free speech is and isn't, especially because it's thrown around so much now with, like, as social media platforms are becoming like the place where people get their news. I feel like people are talking a lot more about censorship and stuff, but no one realizes that like free speech is a government right and not like a platform right. All right, so that was actually really interesting because it kind of changes the discussion from if Elon is a proponent of free speech, because as Devin is saying, free speech is from the government and there is a level of moderation on all social media platforms, to what is Elon's actual mission with this and can it be saved? Because I think if it's not about free speech, it can be about other things, like creating a platform that is really good for conversation, right? Because that's the ultimate goal. Like free speech is in service of people connecting and being informed on topics. And so I think that right now, we're in the eye of the storm. There's so much going on Twitter. Even though the general user may not be affected, as Devin and I were saying, there's still a lot behind the scenes happening with like maybe employees feeling overworked and not a clear vision and this increase in hate speech, etc. But I'm an optimist at heart. And so I think that because we've seen Elon's successful track record with other companies, if he truly cares and has good intentions about Twitter, I think that we could see Twitter resurface. And I think that the way that they can do this is by getting rid of the $8 a month verification system. I think that was a bad call. Increasing support for creators so there's a lot more high quality content on Twitter, and then creating features that general average people actually care about so they can increase the user base, which then will help the advertiser problem. If you want to see a video on how AI is going to revolutionize the world, you can click right here, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.